Welcome to Ignite Your Confidence for women in leadership who want to speak up and stand out. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Here you'll get all of the tips and tools that you need to stand out with unshakable confidence. Let's dive into today's episode. How to engage people on Zoom. Well, we're going to start with what not to do because I can tell you this. Just yesterday, I was on a call and I thought, this is so boring. And there's something she could do about it that would make it totally different. So, what I want to say first, what not to do, this might turn out to be a rant by me, but it's amazing these things that are so simple that we can change that will make a huge difference. So, I was on a call where obviously, I was a participant. I was not leading this meeting. And the person who was leading the meeting said, I want to have you hold all your questions to the end. So, I'm going to just talk for a while and then hold those questions. Do not do that. Okay. It is fine to have questions at the end as well, but make sure that you make it engaging. The way to keep a meeting engaging is for people to actually get the opportunity to talk. So let's talk about this as an example of how that set up this meeting to have people stay quiet, even when they were asked if they had any questions. And the other thing that I would say is it's not just, do you have any questions? First of all, I've got so many tips in here. I can't even stand it. Okay. So first of all, I'm losing track. Instead of asking, do you have any questions? Which automatically makes somebody think, oh, it's a yes or no. Assume that they have questions and say, what questions do you have? So what questions do you have? That shows this posture of, I want to hear your questions. I'm ready. Bring them on. And the other thing is to make sure that you are actually not just asking for questions, but you're asking for comments. Would anybody like to add anything? And it set up this almost teacher student dynamic. Now, there's nothing wrong with that in the right place. But in this case, it was a group of professionals on a call listening to an expert talk about something. But even when an expert is coming with their expertise, as experts, those of you listening, everybody's an expert in something that's listening to this right now. You want to make sure that you invite those questions, you invite comments throughout the entire thing. And this is what people tell me time and time again when I do presentations, when I do keynotes, when I do anything where I am talking with people. It is amazing how many people tell me, oh my gosh, that was so engaging. I'm used to the presenter just presenting. And so many times I am on, oh my goodness, that is my crazy. I'm not even going to say I don't know if you can hear that in the background, but that is my husband's ice machine that he is super excited about. And I keep forgetting to turn it off when I record things. So nonetheless, there you have it. Welcome to my life. Welcome to my marriage. But when you think about this, the idea of engaging people, you want to make sure that you are getting them to be tuned in, not tuned out. And that is exactly the tuned out is what generally happens, certainly for me, and I'm guessing for some others. And I was amazed at how this group, who's normally talkative, was pretty quiet. But it's because of the experience that this presenter created. She didn't create an experience where people could openly talk. So let's talk about what to do. So first of all, let me remind you, okay, so we're on the call. She's this expert. Great. Looking forward to hearing from you. And that's when she just immediately said, hold all your questions to the end. And mind you, we were going to be on this call for an hour. And I was thinking, oh my gosh, how long is her actual presentation? So thankfully, well, not thankfully, it was almost the entire hour. And so let's break this down a little bit. So she was talking about what she was talking about. And first of all, let's take a pause and talk about why we tend to do this. Most people, if they're not comfortable, they're nervous, or they're not used to presenting regularly, will say that because they don't want to lose their flow. They are perhaps nervous about somebody asking a question in the middle, or they legitimately are thinking, I don't want people to ask a question that I'm going to cover in 5, 10, 15 minutes. So I can understand the logic, but the problem is it doesn't work if you want to have your audience engaged at the optimal level. We've got to make sure, if we think about this, at the end of the day, it's about influence. It's about being heard. It's about being memorable. If you want to stand out, then that's what you got to do, is keep things engaged. So we have to get over it. You have to figure this out. You can hire a coach, you can hire me, you can hire someone to help you have good flow in your presentation and also not be thrown off by the things that come at you. Okay, so here's one other tip that I want to say. When you do get a question that you're going to answer later in your talk, I recommend doing what I call a quick hit answer now and then elaboration later. Because if a person has a question about something that you're talking about now and it's on their mind, they're going to be focused on that, and they're not even going to be fully listening to you anyway because they want to get their question answered. They might be good students and write it down or have it in their mind to ask you later, but the truth is it's a little almost disappointing when you have a question, you're eager to get it answered, and then you have to wait. So I would say honor the instant gratification concept that is so prevalent in our society today. Why not? So first of all, what you do then is you say, so let's say for me, let's say I'm talking about leadership presence, and I know that I am going to talk about, like I usually start with talking about connection, I talk about energy, and then I talk about credibility. So let's just say that might be one model. So for example, let's say I know that later down the line, I'm going to talk about pausing, but somebody is really excited when I'm talking about eye contact and they say, oh, I have a question about pausing. And then I'm going to say, okay, great. I am going to cover that in a little bit, but I'm happy to answer it quickly for you right now. Or I'll give you a quick answer now and then we'll elaborate later. Do you know how satisfying that is for somebody that is hungry to get a question answered? That is such a great way to engage your listener, to keep them happy, and to make you look good too. There's lots of benefits. So that's a big thing that I would keep in mind. And so let's talk about this in a little bit more detail, or a little bit around this. So you've got that. So what you want to do instead, okay. So instead of, let's go back to the beginning. Instead of hold your questions to the end, say, we've got about 45 minutes together. I'm going to cover this, this, and this. And if you have questions, I'm definitely going to have time for questions later, but if you have questions throughout, feel free to bring those up or drop them in the chat. I'd be happy to take questions in the chat. And as a side note, folks, if you have a bunch of people in the meeting, depending upon your comfort level, if possible, and there's bandwidth and you've got people available, get somebody to manage the chat for you so you don't have to do both. But sometimes you just have to do both. It's just the way it is. But that's something to keep in mind, especially if you're nervous or you're trying to stay focused when you're presenting on something. But if you can continue to do that throughout, and this is also a tricky part where, let's say you're in the middle of presenting and you see the chat going crazy, or you just see one person in the chat, you see a comment, keep in mind, it's a tough thing here because you want to keep your flow, but if somebody has made a comment, you also want to acknowledge it. It could be as simple as, John, I see your comment there. That's great. Or it could be something where you read the comment. It depends how many comments, it depends how long they are. There's a lot of things that you want to take into account. And again, this is all about, I always tell everybody, common sense has got to override anything. You've got to think, what's going to be the best experience for the audience right now? That's how you always want to think. What is going to be the best experience for the audience to stay engaged and stay with you? Okay, so the other thing is, throughout your talk, encourage people to speak up. And again, not do you have any questions? What questions do you have? Who has a comment? I would love to hear a response to that. The other thing don't talk so long in between the comments because people's brains need to keep up. And if you want them to talk about or engage with something that you're focused on, that particular part of the presentation, you need to give them some time and silence to actually interject. And if you do that, you're going to have a lot more people interested in what you're talking about. I see it all the time. And as a matter of fact, I did a keynote on Zoom a few weeks ago with 170 people. And I had a colleague that wanted to listen and watch to see how I did it. And she's been facilitating for years. And, I got the best compliment from her after. She goes, "Oh my gosh, you even engaged with 170 people. I would not have thought to do that." And I'm thinking, why wouldn't you? This is common sense for facilitators. Now, I don't mean to be critical. Please hear me when I say I'm all about the experience. And that's why we've got to be thinking differently for some of us. We need to stop thinking about that, oh, a person presents and then people ask questions. I still get clients or potential clients, usually clients, where they're talking about the keynote that I'm going to do. And they'll say, okay, we have 30 minutes of time for you to present and then 15 minutes of Q&A. And I always tell them, look, I'm going to bundle that whole thing because I invite questions throughout the entire talk. So usually by the end of the talk, people don't have any questions left because they've asked them the entire time. I'm telling you, this is what will make you stand out. It has worked for me. I've seen it time and time again. And it really is, to me, it's very common sense, but I'm continually reminded at how this isn't common sense for everybody. So I wanted to do a podcast specifically on this. Okay. Throughout, the other way that you can engage people okay, let's go back to the beginning. When you set the expectations, you tell them that you want them to comment either verbally or in the chat, then definitely that's excellent. Now, before that, as people are coming in, this is the time that you have an opportunity to build relationships. And this is so key. A lot of people don't take advantage of this. They just look at their phones. They just say, okay, we'll wait for a few minutes until everybody comes. This is the time to engage people by asking questions, things, maybe even lighter things like, what are you, well, not that this is lighter, but what are you grateful for today? Or something like, did you enjoy? What are you looking forward to in the next week? Icebreaker questions, things that will be helpful to get the audience saying, or just getting them all ready. You're priming them to be involved. So it could even be something as simple as, and you've probably all seen this or heard this, tell us where you're coming from. Where are you calling in from? And it could even be, what did you have for breakfast today? I don't know. It could be anything at all that you want to say. The point is to get people engaged, listening, and staying with you. Okay, another way that you can engage people in the beginning, I don't see this very much, but music is fantastic. Have some music playing, have some great energy going. This is a wonderful way to keep people just lighter. You've got some levity. It's a wonderful tool. It's also a great tool to use at breaks. When you have a longer Zoom meeting or even in person, same idea, have music. It's a wonderful way to signal to people, oh, we're on a break now, and oh, we're back now when that music stops. So that's another great way to keep people with you. The other thing that I love to do as people are coming into the Zoom room is to ask them to share in the chat. What are you looking to get from this session today? What are you hoping to get from this meeting? Even something like, even if you're meeting people or you're meeting the same people all the time on Zoom, nothing wrong with saying, why did you show up today? Or, you could even, oftentimes I used to make a joke and say, did you come because your boss told you you had to? Was it mandatory? No, that was earlier on in my career, but you can make light of these things. But the key here is keep asking questions, keep getting people to chime in. Now, what do you do if nobody chimes in? Oh, that's always so hard, isn't it? So this is where I love to employ the tip of quantifying things. So for example, hey, I want to hear from 3 people. before we jump in. 3 people who would like to share. And then the key is you have to pause long enough to get people to actually speak. And usually about 15 seconds is the sweet spot. It can feel like a lifetime. And sometimes I don't even wait that long, but it's reading the room and giving people that space. And also, you're showing them your boundaries right at the beginning. You're saying, hey, I'm not going to continue until I hear from 3 people. Now, this is also a great technique if too many people are talking. That's a great time to say, okay, let's hear from 2 more people before we move on. So those are some helpful techniques to specifically get people engaged and also to stop them from engaging if it's too much. Now, I will say one other thing, excuse me, no, I'm going to say more than one other thing. Who am I kidding? But the other thing, as far as keeping people engaged, particularly in the beginning, is I was going to say, when people are not commenting, call on names. Now, I wouldn't do it cold. Hear me out. I would do it in the beginning. I would let people know, hey, I'm hoping that people are going to engage and contribute because we want to make sure that we have a really rich discussion here today. And if for some reason people aren't commenting, I'm going to call on a couple of people, and that's how we're going to roll. So if you're uncomfortable with, you can always pass, no problem. But as we progress, I may just call out some names and have you contribute. So those are some of my tips that were hot off the press based on this meeting that I was at that was really, unfortunately, not engaging. And it's interesting because there was some good information on there, but I did have a hard time staying with her. So, and she was a lovely person. And then, here's what also happened. Keep thinking of things. This is what I started saying earlier. What also happened is that when she did stop and ask if people had any questions, first of all, she asked a closed-ended question. Does anybody have a question? Or does anybody have a question? And most people were so conditioned at that point to be quiet that they didn't ask any questions. And she missed out on an opportunity. This is where our job as the leader of a meeting or the facilitator of a meeting is to make sure that we are pulling people out. I'm amazed at how many times people can be pulled out of their shell or just drawn into the conversation when you ask questions. So if nothing else, think about that as your takeaway today. What questions can you ask? And I would have a toolbox full of questions, 5 to 10 questions that you can rotate to ask, and that will help you to keep your audience with you so that you will be memorable and you will stand out with unshakable confidence, because don't we all want that? I know I do. All right, I hope you've enjoyed these tips. I definitely would love to hear from you, especially if you have feedback or if there's anything that you would like to add with your tips. In the spirit of me suggesting that you ask questions, I would say, please jump in, ask me questions, and email me, what have you. I'd love to hear from you. My email is Karen@KarenLaus. And by the way, if you know anybody that is hosting a conference or is an event planner or works with particularly women in an organization in the corporate world, I would love to talk with them. If you'd be open to giving an introduction, I would love to be introduced so that we could talk about me potentially being a speaker at your next event, so that I can help you and your team stand out with unshakable confidence and be seen as an influential leader. Until next time, have a wonderful rest of your day. That's a wrap of another episode of Ignite Your Confidence. I'm your host, Karen Laus. Thank you so much for listening. If you loved today's episode, please subscribe and leave a review. It helps other people find the podcast faster, and it certainly helps me. If you're interested in more tips and tools around confidence, please join me over in my Facebook group called Ignite Your Confidence with Karen Laus. Remember, you too can stand out with unshakable confidence.